my great privilege now to introduce a former ambassador to Belgium and NATO, and just about every other job that we can have in this wonderful nation of Australia in many ways, Dr. Brendan Nelson, from the Director General of the Australian Government.
Thank you very much, Tim. Director General, I like that. I'll tell the staff that's my new title. My friend, the Honourable Tim Fisher, Deputy Lord Mayor, Susan Riley, Minister, of course, also my friend, former colleague Stuart Robert, the excellencies that are here, Carmel and Puss, respectively from Telstra and the Commonwealth Bank. None of this would be possible without support of your two corporations. I can't thank you enough. The veterans that are here, the men and women who wear and have worn the uniform of our three services, and the families who love and support you. The only thing that could be better, by the way, here in Melbourne, Susan, is the St Kilda winning a flag, but I live in hope. As you step into the Spirit of the Anzac Centenary experience, in the third area is a magnificent, greatly enlarged photograph of the 11th Battalion on one of the pyramids whilst in Egypt. And just next to it is a photograph of a lanky man standing in front of a tent. He's not a household name, but he should be. His name is Charles B. He was chosen by his own colleagues to be the official war correspondent for the First World War, and subsequently he would be appointed as the official historian, and over almost a quarter of a century he would write and edit the 12 volumes, The Official History of the First World War. He landed with the Australian troops at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. He stayed with them at the front through the entire war. He was wounded at Gallipoli and refused evacuation, and it was said of Bean that no one risked death more often than him. At the very end of it all, with a blank page on his typewriter, struggling with the words to summarise all of it, he wrote this: "What these men did, nothing can alter now. The good and the bad. The greatness and the smallness of their story. It rises, it always rises, above the mists of ages. A monument to great-hearted men, and for their nation, a possession forever." We were a nation with a population approximating that of Melbourne today. 4.5 million people. 1 million men of an age that could volunteer, from a nation that twice said no to conscription. 417,000 of them did volunteer. 112,000 Victorians. We sent 330,000 overseas. 90,000 Victorians. And then 4 years later we emerged from the war, proud of what our young nation had achieved, but inconsolably mourning 62,000 men. Every nation has its story. This is our story. The Spirit of the Anzac Centenary experience is that story from which our nation emerged in the First World War, and then, as the Minister reminded us, a century of service to our nation ever since. Cyril Buckler is one, just one of the young men to whom you will be introduced when you go through this exhibition. He was born to William and Elizabeth in 1896 in Wangaratta. He had a brother, Sydney. He went to Wangaratta North State School, Wangaratta Agricultural High School, but then, like his brother, worked as a postman. And despite the publication of the casualty lists out of Gallipoli in late 1915, he joined the AIF in early 1916. A part of the 17th Reinforcements for the 14th Battalion, he arrived in France at Marseille on the 8th of June 1916. Less than 2 months later, he was dead. He was killed at Pozières in the early morning of the 7th of August 1916, shot through the forehead in no man's land, countering a German counterattack. He was 20 years old. His mother received some of his personal effects, repositories of love, meaning and grief, and then they decided to name their house in Rowan Street, Wangaratta, Poziere, in honour of their son. Charles Bean, observing all of that at Poziere, recorded this in late July. Many a man lying out there at Poziere, and in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. And we are. We're bloody proud. And that is why, to its immense credit, the Australian government, both sides of politics, supported by the Commonwealth Bank, by Telstra, our Defence Forces, and clearly supported by the Australian War Memorial, we are proud of this exhibition. You will step into it and be reminded of the Australia we were in 1914, a young, vibrant, urbane, confident country. We're reminded of the desperately unequal circumstances in which Aboriginal people lived. And then the declaration of the war, the formation of the Australian Imperial Force, the time spent in Egypt after the military and naval campaign in New Guinea, and then of course the Gallipoli landing, and all that would follow with the carnage, first in France and then Belgium, and then the stunning leadership of General Sir John Monash in 1918 of the Australian Corps. But this is not a story of triumphalism. You will emerge from the exhibition proud of what our young nation had achieved, but informed by a sober understanding of the immense cost. And arising from the war, the RSL, not long after it, Legacy Australia, the role played by nurses and the support provided by families here in Australia. It is about war, but in many ways it's a story of love and friendship. Men and women, friends of one another, love of our country, and of all of the things that the exhibition represents, it's ultimately giving us a greater belief in ourselves and a deeper understanding of what it means to be Australian. We were a relatively young country, but until the cataclysm that is represented here unfolded and everything that ensued, we didn't really have our story. And the century of service reminds us and every visitor to it that a life of value is one ultimately spent in the service of other human beings, irrespective of the cost to ourselves. We're very proud to support the exhibition, as the Minister reminded you, with 200 artefacts, objects, images that go through it, and we're very determined to see that we're able to get it to as many parts of the country as is possible. Thank you very much.